The sky over the frozen plains of Viralia was a harsh, pale gray, stretching endlessly in every direction. Jagged mountains loomed far in the distance, their peaks sharp and cruel against the thin light of the twin suns. Snow whipped across the plains in fierce gusts, biting at every exposed inch of skin. The world was beautiful, but it was not forgiving. Talon trudged carefully over the icy ground, each step measured and deliberate. He wore thick, reinforced clothing, insulated boots, and a hood pulled tight around his face. Even with all the protection, the cold gnawed at his fingers and toes. He was a human explorer, one of the few to venture so far from the core worlds of the galaxy. The rumors of a frozen planet untouched by civilizations drew him here. But even he had not expected Viralia to be this relentless. The wind carried a faint sound, almost drowned by the storm, a soft cry that made Talon pause. He squinted into the white haze, trying to locate the source. The sound repeated, weak but desperate. Curiosity and concern pushed him forward. He adjusted the thermal lens on his helmet and scanned the horizon. A small shape appeared, lying motionless in the snow. As he approached, the shape became clearer. It was a figure, humanoid in shape but unlike any human he had ever seen. Her skin had a faint, shimmering blue tint that glimmered even under the dull light. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was shallow. She was covered in frost and her long, delicate limbs trembled as if the cold itself had taken hold of her body. Talon's heart raced. He had encountered many alien species in his explorations, but never one so fragile and beautiful. His first thought was survival. If she remained here, she would die within minutes. Without hesitation, he pulled off his gloves, ignoring the frostbite creeping along his fingers, and lifted her carefully. Despite her fragile appearance, she was surprisingly light, almost as if her body had been hollowed by the cold. "Hang on," he whispered, trying to steady his own shaking hands. The wind tore at him, but he held her close to his chest, using his body heat to shield her. Her faint pulse fluttered beneath his touch. Every step across the ice was a challenge, but Talon did not stop. Ahead, he could see the faint glow of his outpost, a small cluster of metal buildings with lights flickering through the storm. It was his only hope of giving her a chance to live. As he trudged through the snow, Talon noticed small details about her that made him marvel. Her fingers were long and delicate, tipped with translucent nails that glimmered in the dim light. Her ears were pointed, subtle but elegant, and her hair flowed like liquid silver, frozen at the ends by the icy wind. Her chest rose and fell with each faint breath, fragile but persistent. Talon's mind raced with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? And how had she ended up alone on this frozen wasteland? There was no time for answers now. Survival came first. Reaching his outpost, Talon pushed open the heavy door and carried her inside. Warm air rushed out, and the difference was immediate. Nira shivered violently, her body convulsing as warmth began to fight the cold that had settled in her bones. Talon set her gently on a cushioned bed near the fireplace. The fire crackled, sending waves of heat that gradually seeped into her frozen limbs. He removed his helmet and gloves, rubbing his hands together to regain circulation. Nira stirred slightly, a soft hum escaping her lips. The sound was unfamiliar to him, melodic and soothing, yet tinged with weakness. He could not understand the language, but her tone spoke of pain and confusion. "Can you hear me?" Talon asked softly, keeping his voice low so as not to alarm her. He placed a warm blanket over her shoulders, hoping to retain what little heat she had left. She blinked slowly, her eyes a deep shade of violet, and stared at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. There was intelligence there, awareness, but also a fragility that made Talon's heart ache. He glanced around his small cabin. It was modest, built for a single human with basic tools, supplies, and a fireplace that had kept him alive in this frozen land. Now it was a sanctuary for a being far more delicate than any human. Talon moved quickly, fetching a heated water container and a cloth to gently wipe the frost from her skin. The warmth caused her to flinch, but he spoke reassuringly, his voice calm and steady. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Nira's shivering slowed, and her breathing became more even. She lifted a hand, trembling, and touched the fire hesitantly, as if testing whether warmth was real or a trick of her senses. Talon watched carefully, ready to respond if she reacted badly. "You're safe now," he said. "No one will hurt you here." Her eyes widened slightly at the words, though she did not respond. Instead, she allowed him to continue, her trust growing in small increments. Talon realized that she had experienced something traumatic, something that left her cautious. Her species may have been advanced, but in that moment she was vulnerable, relying entirely on a human for survival. The night grew longer, and the storm outside raged with renewed fury. Talon stayed close, watching over her, offering warmth and occasional sips of water. He noticed the subtle changes in her skin as her body adjusted to the heat. The blue tint faded slightly, replaced by a soft glow that seemed almost ethereal. She was alive, and the relief washed over him like a wave. He could not help but wonder how much danger she had faced alone in the frozen plains. Every thought made him more determined to keep her safe. Her survival was now his responsibility, and he would not fail. Humans were resilient, capable of ingenuity and compassion, and he intended to prove it to her, even if she could not yet understand. Hours passed. The storm outside dulled to a whisper, though the air remained cold. Nira stirred again, lifting her head slightly, her violet eyes meeting his. For the first time there was recognition, a flicker of connection. She raised a hand slowly, reaching toward him, and Talon gently took it in his own. Her skin was still cool, but her fingers moved with more strength than before. "You're strong," he said quietly. "You made it this far. You'll make it further." Though she could not speak yet, she let out a soft hum in response, and Talon felt a strange warmth in his chest, not from the fire, but from a sense of shared understanding. In that quiet cabin, amidst the firelight and the remnants of the storm, two beings from different worlds found a moment of connection. Talon looked at her and smiled faintly. He did not know what her future held or how long she would remain in his care, but he knew one thing with certainty: he would not let her die. Humans had survived in harsh environments, faced threats greater than this frozen world, and endured impossible odds. Now he would bring those same qualities to bear for her. He adjusted the blanket, making sure she was comfortable, and allowed himself a small sigh of relief. The journey was far from over. Challenges awaited them both, but for the first time Nira was safe, and Talon had proven that human determination could bridge even the greatest divides. As the fire crackled and the shadows danced across the cabin walls, Talon kept his watch, prepared to defend, nurture, and guide this fragile alien woman who had fallen into his care. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the universe, life was fragile, but humans had the ability to make a difference, to offer hope where none seemed possible. And tonight, in this small cabin on a frozen world, that hope had found a form, fragile yet shining brightly in the eyes of a rescued alien. The storm outside the cabin had eased, leaving the world in an eerie silence broken only by the faint howl of wind across the frozen plains. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting gentle shadows across the walls. Nira lay wrapped in blankets, her delicate frame slowly regaining color and warmth. Her violet eyes watched Talon as he moved about the cabin, his every motion careful, deliberate, as though he feared startling her. Talon placed a pot of steaming water near the fire. The heat rising from it mingled with the flames, creating a comfortable warmth that slowly spread through the small room. He knelt beside Nira and gently wiped the frost from her arms, careful not to touch her too roughly. Every movement was precise, almost reverent. "Almost all the frost is gone," he said softly. "You're getting stronger." Nira watched him closely, her eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and caution. She made a soft humming sound, a vocal tone that resonated in the air like a tiny musical note. Talon tilted his head, trying to understand, and realized that although he could not comprehend her language, the tone carried meaning. It was not fear or anger. It was a sign, subtle but clear, of acknowledgement. He smiled gently. "I don't understand your words, but I can hear you. You're trying to speak to me." For a moment Nira hesitated. Then she lifted a hand trembling and pointed to the fire. Talon followed her gesture and nodded. "Yes, the fire keeps you warm. It's safe. You can stay here as long as you need." The alien woman tilted her head slightly, examining him as if weighing his intentions. Her eyes were bright and intelligent, reflecting an ancient knowledge, yet her body was fragile and vulnerable. Talon realized that trust would not come quickly, but it could come with patience and care. He moved to a small cabinet and brought out a few basic supplies: warm water, clean cloths, and a nutrient paste he often carried for emergencies. The paste was bland but nutritious, designed to sustain explorers like him in harsh environments. He held it out to her, speaking softly. "This will help you regain your strength. You don't have to eat if you're not ready, but it will make you stronger." Nira watched the container, then looked back at him, her expression cautious. After a few moments, she reached out with her thin fingers and took a small amount. Talon watched closely as she tasted it, her eyes widening slightly. She hummed again, this time a softer, more approving note. The sound was musical, delicate, and it warmed Talon's heart in a way the fire could not. "You're very cautious," he said with a small laugh. "I would be too if I were in your place." She tilted her head again and extended a hand, pointing at his chest. Talon realized she was trying to communicate something about him. He pressed a finger to his own chest and nodded. "I am human. My name is Talon. I am here to help you." Nira's eyes studied him and she let out another hum. This time it was longer, almost as if she were considering his words carefully. Then she lowered her hand, curling it near her chest. Talon understood that she had accepted, at least for now, that he meant no harm. He smiled, though cautiously. Trust, he knew, was fragile and could be lost in an instant. He wanted her to feel safe in his presence. "You don't have to speak. You don't even have to move if you don't want to. Just rest and recover. I will stay here." Hours passed. The fire crackled steadily, and the small cabin felt like a safe bubble away from the frozen world outside. Nira slowly moved her hands and arms, testing their strength. Her movements were hesitant but deliberate. She flexed her fingers and watched Talon carefully, as though learning what a human body could do. Talon observed her silently. There was something extraordinary about the way she moved, a grace and precision that was alien yet elegant. He could see her curiosity growing, her fear slowly replaced by cautious interest. She pointed again, this time to the window. Talon opened it slightly, letting a small amount of cold air in. Nira flinched but did not move away. Instead, she raised a hand toward the storm outside, then looked at him. "It's cold," Talon said simply. "Outside is dangerous. Here, near the fire, you're safe." Nira hummed again, a note of understanding this time. She seemed to absorb his words, though she could not speak them back. Talon realized that her species likely had different ways of communicating, relying on tone, gesture, and subtle expressions. He would need to be patient, but he could teach her to understand humans, just as she could teach him about her world. As the night deepened, Talon brought out a small blanket and wrapped it snugly around her shoulders. Nira looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and hesitated before she allowed herself to relax. She leaned slightly into the warmth, her body still trembling but less violently than before. "You're brave," Talon whispered. "You've survived the storm. You're alive. That is something to be proud of." She tilted her head, studying his face closely. For the first time, her gaze lingered on him with more than caution. There was curiosity, a spark of something almost like recognition. Talon felt a strange connection forming, a bond that transcended language or species. He moved back slightly, giving her space, but remained close enough that she could see him. "You don't have to trust me all at once," he said softly. "Just take your time. You can rest. You can breathe. You're safe here." Hours passed, the night deep and quiet. Nira's body continued to regain warmth and her movements became more natural. She reached out again, this time touching the blanket covering her shoulders. Talon watched, then gently touched the blanket with her hand, allowing her to feel the warmth he provided. She hummed softly, and for the first time a small smile curved her lips. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was there. Talon realized that this moment was important. Trust, he knew, was built slowly, moment by moment. The fact that she allowed herself a tiny gesture of comfort meant she had begun to accept him as an ally. That was the first step toward understanding, and he would cherish it. He spoke again, his voice calm and steady. "I know you've been through a lot. I don't know everything about your journey, but I do know that you survived. You are strong, even if you don't feel it yet." Nira hummed, a low, steady tone that seemed to carry approval. She shifted slightly on the bed, testing her strength, then touched Talon's hand briefly in a gesture that felt almost like gratitude. He squeezed her hand gently, careful not to startle her, and smiled. "Good," he said. "We will figure things out together, one step at a time." As the fire burned low, Talon began thinking about the challenges ahead. Nira was far from home, her species unknown to him, her needs and abilities a mystery. Yet he felt a sense of purpose, a drive to protect and help her. Humans were resilient, adaptable, and capable of compassion, and he intended to prove it to her. The night wore on, and Nira's eyes grew heavy. She leaned back against the blankets, her breathing steady and even. Talon kept watch, alert to any signs of distress. Though exhausted from the rescue and the storm, he could not sleep. He sat beside her, silent but vigilant, knowing that every moment of care mattered. By the time the first light of the twin suns filtered through the frosted window, Nira was resting peacefully. Her body was warmer, her breathing calm, and her eyes closed in trust. Talon felt a quiet satisfaction, not from victory but from the simple act of keeping another being alive. In the vast, harsh universe, moments like this were rare and precious. He allowed himself a small smile. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we start learning about each other, and together, we will survive this world." The cabin remained quiet, filled with the gentle warmth of the fire and the growing trust between two beings from different worlds. One was human, strong and determined. The other was alien, fragile yet intelligent. Together they had begun a journey of understanding, respect, and hope. And in that small frozen cabin on Virelia, the first bonds of friendship had been formed. The morning light filtered through the frosted windows, casting a pale glow across the small cabin. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving behind soft embers that still radiated warmth. Nira stirred, slowly opening her violet eyes. She stretched delicately, testing her strength, and noticed Talon sitting nearby. He had been awake for hours, watching over her without rest. For a brief moment she studied him quietly, marveling at the way his human body adapted to the cold world outside. His skin, rugged from exposure, contrasted with the softness of his hands as they moved with care. His eyes were alert yet gentle, a mixture that seemed to say he was both cautious and protective. Nira realized that humans carried a quiet strength, something different from her own species, and it fascinated her. Talon noticed her eyes opening and smiled softly. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and friendly. "You rested well?" Nira tilted her head slightly, considering the sound of his words. She could not speak in the human language yet, but she made a soft hum, a sound that seemed to acknowledge his greeting. Talon nodded, interpreting it as yes, and offered her a small bowl of warm nutrient paste. "This will give you energy," he explained. "You need it after yesterday." She reached for the bowl cautiously, her fingers brushing against his as she took it. The warmth of the food surprised her at first, but she tasted it carefully and then hummed in approval. Talon smiled. Every small gesture, every sound she made was a step toward understanding, a bridge forming between their two very different worlds. After breakfast, Talon stood and stretched. "I need to check the supplies," he said. "Would you like to come with me?" Nira looked at him, curious. She had observed humans for some time in her own travels, but she had never seen one in such a small, simple space. The idea of moving around with him intrigued her. She nodded slightly, her hair brushing across her shoulders as she followed him. The cabin was modest but well organized. Talon opened cabinets, pointed to containers, and explained their contents. "This is food," he said, holding up a small packet. "This is water. These are tools. Everything has a purpose." Nira listened, tilting her head and humming thoughtfully. She tried to mimic his gestures, pointing at objects and then touching herself to indicate understanding. Talon watched her with interest. "We can make a simple language," he said softly. "Not words, but gestures and signs. It will help us understand each other." Over the next hour, Talon demonstrated basic communication techniques. He pointed to himself and said, "Talon." Then he gestured to her and waited. Nira hesitated, then pointed to herself. Talon nodded encouragingly. "Good," he said. "You remembered. That is your name, Nira." The alien woman repeated the gesture several times, each time gaining confidence. Talon realized that her intelligence was extraordinary, capable of learning quickly if guided with patience. He also noticed the curiosity in her eyes. She wanted to explore, to understand the small human world she had entered, and he welcomed it. "Do you want to see outside?" he asked. Nira hesitated, glancing at the window. The frozen plains were dangerous, but she could see the beauty in the distant mountains, the glimmer of ice under the twin suns. She nodded carefully, and Talon opened the door, letting a rush of cold air into the cabin. She flinched but stepped outside, feeling the crunch of snow beneath her feet. Talon followed closely, keeping one hand near her in case she slipped. She examined the world around her, touching the snow with her fingers and lifting her hand to let the flakes melt away. Each sensation seemed new and fascinating. "The cold is strong here," Talon said, his voice calm. "But you are safe as long as you stay close to me." Nira hummed in agreement, and they walked a short distance from the cabin, observing the frozen landscape. She pointed at the sky, then at the horizon, and Talon followed her gestures. He realized she was trying to tell him something about the world she came from. "Tell me about your home," he said softly, though he doubted she would answer in words. She raised a hand to her chest, then extended it outward, as if describing a large space filled with light. Talon nodded, understanding that her homeland was vast, open, and possibly warmer than this frozen world. He marveled at the way she communicated, using gestures, sounds, and expressions rather than language. Back inside, Talon set up a small table with paper, pencils, and simple symbols. "We can write things down," he said. "Not words, but symbols for objects, feelings, and actions." Nira approached the table cautiously, her fingers brushing the surface. She hummed again, testing the pencils, and then drew a few shapes on the paper. Talon watched closely, interpreting her marks as attempts to represent objects she had seen outside. He added a few symbols of his own, creating a rudimentary system of communication. Hours passed in this way, with Talon and Nira exchanging gestures, symbols, and soft hums. Each interaction strengthened their understanding. Nira began to mimic some human expressions, smiling faintly when pleased, frowning when unsure. Talon responded in kind, reinforcing positive gestures and patiently correcting misunderstandings. By midday, they had developed a small vocabulary of gestures and symbols. Nira could indicate hunger, warmth, curiosity, and trust. Talon could convey safety, caution, and basic emotions. It was not perfect, but it was enough for two beings from different worlds to begin communicating meaningfully. During a brief rest by the fire, Nira reached out and touched Talon's hand again, this time holding it for a longer moment. He understood the gesture as gratitude and responded with a gentle squeeze. For a creature who had been alone and vulnerable, this small act of connection meant a great deal. Talon decided it was time to teach her about simple human routines. He showed her how to use the fireplace, how to fetch water, and how to prepare basic food. Nira watched with fascination, her violet eyes wide and attentive. She attempted the tasks herself, her delicate hands struggling at first but gradually learning through observation and repetition. "You are quick to learn," Talon said, smiling. "Most humans would take much longer to figure this out." She tilted her head, humming softly, and tried again. The warmth of the cabin and the steady presence of Talon gave her confidence. She was learning that humans could be patient, understanding, and capable of nurturing care. These qualities were rare in her experiences across the galaxy, where strength often outweighed empathy. As evening approached, Talon prepared a simple meal. Nira watched him, curious about the process. He offered her some food and she accepted, tasting carefully before humming in approval. Sharing the meal became a quiet ritual, a moment of connection between the two. It was more than survival. It was a bridge between worlds built on patience, understanding, and trust. After the meal, Talon suggested a small game to help reinforce their communication. He placed objects on the table, stones, pieces of metal, and small containers, and asked Nira to indicate each one using her symbols. She hesitated, then pointed, drew, and hummed. Talon corrected gently when necessary and praised her when she succeeded. By the end of the evening, Nira was exhausted but content. She curled near the fire, her eyes half closed, and allowed herself to relax fully in Talon's presence. For the first time since the crash, she felt safe, understood, and cared for. Talon watched her quietly, a deep sense of satisfaction and hope filling him. He realized that humans had an extraordinary ability to create bonds even across species. Compassion, patience, and intelligence were tools as powerful as any weapon, and he had used them to save a life, build trust, and begin a journey of understanding. Nira was more than a fragile alien. She was intelligent, curious, and capable of forming connections that could last a lifetime. As night fell, Talon prepared the cabin for sleep. Nira rested near the fire, her body finally free from the tremors of fear and cold. Talon sat nearby, keeping watch, listening to the faint hums she made as she slept. Each sound was a promise, a sign that she was beginning to trust him fully. Outside, The frozen world of Virelia remained harsh and unforgiving, but inside the cabin, warmth and understanding had taken root. Two beings from different worlds had begun a journey together, learning not only to survive but to communicate, trust and care for one another. In that quiet, fire-lit room, a human and an alien were discovering something rare in the universe: the power of connection, the beauty of curiosity, and the strength of compassion. The day had been long, challenging, and filled with learning, but it had forged the beginnings of a bond that neither time nor distance could easily break. Talon whispered softly, almost to himself, "Tomorrow we will learn even more. We will understand each other better, and together, we will face whatever comes." Nira hummed softly in reply, a sound that carried understanding and a hint of anticipation. She had survived, she had learned, and most importantly, she had begun to trust. And in the quiet warmth of the cabin, the seeds of friendship and partnership were growing, ready to face the vast frozen world outside. The frozen plains outside the cabin were silent, but Talon could feel an uneasy tension in the air. He had spent several days helping Nira recover and teaching her about basic human routines. Their communication had improved and she had begun to trust him completely. Yet, in the back of his mind, he could not shake the feeling that their safety was fragile. Virelia was a harsh world and danger often came uninvited. Talon paced near the window, peering into the gray horizon. The wind whipped snow into swirling patterns, hiding much of the terrain from view. He listened carefully, relying not only on his eyes but also on subtle sounds: the crunch of ice, the shift of distant rocks, and even the faintest hum in the air. His instincts had kept him alive in many hostile environments, and now they warned him that they were not alone. Nira, seated on the floor near the fire, watched him curiously. She tilted her head, noticing the tension in his posture. Her eyes, deep violet and intelligent, conveyed a silent question. Talon turned to her and gestured, pointing to the door and then to himself. He mouthed words carefully. "Danger might come. We must be ready." Nira hummed in understanding and stood, moving closer to him. Her movements were cautious but deliberate, showing the trust she now placed in him. Talon felt a wave of pride mixed with concern. She was strong, intelligent, and curious, but she was still vulnerable. If they were attacked, she would rely on his human ingenuity and protection. As night approached, the tension became more tangible. Talon had fortified the cabin as best as he could, stacking supplies against doors and windows. He had rigged a simple alarm system with scraps of metal and string that would clang loudly if disturbed. Nira watched him, her violet eyes wide, and he took the time to explain each precaution. She listened attentively, pointing at the objects and humming to show she understood. Hours passed, and the wind outside howled through the frozen plains. Talon kept a vigilant watch by the window. Then a faint sound reached his ears, a scraping, crunching movement that did not belong to the storm. He froze, signaling Nira to stay low. She crouched near the fire, observing him with wide eyes, her body tense but ready to act. The sound grew louder. Figures appeared in the distance, barely visible through the swirling snow. Humans or alien scavengers, Talon could not tell, but their approach was deliberate, methodical. They moved in a formation that suggested coordination, weapons glinting faintly even in the gray light. Talon's mind raced. They had found her, or perhaps her ship, and now they sought her for their own gain. He whispered to Nira, keeping his voice low. "We may have visitors. Stay close. Follow my lead." Nira nodded, her small hand brushing against his. She did not speak, but the hum she made conveyed her understanding and readiness. Talon moved to a small storage area and retrieved a few tools and makeshift weapons. Simple human devices designed more for defense than offense. He handed Nira a small, lightweight object. "This is to protect yourself," he said. "Not to harm unnecessarily. Just to stay safe." Nira examined it curiously, her fingers brushing the smooth surface. She hummed again, the tone cautious but resolute. Talon realized that she understood the seriousness of the situation. She was not just a fragile alien anymore. She was a partner in survival. The figures outside came closer, their shapes clearer through the snow. Talon recognized the scavenger's armor, patched metal, scavenged technology, and weapons cobbled together. They were opportunists, dangerous but not clever enough to anticipate all the tricks a human mind could devise. Talon had survived attacks before, and he intended to use every bit of ingenuity at his disposal. He whispered to Nira, pointing to the windows, and then to himself. "Stay low. Watch and learn. We will use the cabin to our advantage." Nira crouched silently, her violet eyes scanning the intruders. She had been observing Talon closely these past days and had learned to understand his strategies through gestures, tone, and subtle movements. She mimicked his careful observation, her senses sharper than most humans, detecting small details in the intruder's approach that even Talon had not noticed. The first intruder reached the cabin and tried the door. The makeshift alarm clanged loudly, sending a sharp metallic echo into the night. Talon and Nira froze, then moved to the windows, observing the reactions of the scavengers. Confusion flickered across their faces. The loud sound had bought them precious seconds, and Talon knew he could use the environment to his advantage. He pointed to Nira, signaling her to follow him. Together they moved silently to a side exit, one that led to a small hidden path behind the cabin. Nira's movements were careful, her trust in him evident. Talon could see that she had learned quickly how to navigate danger. Her alien agility made her almost silent on the icy ground, and he marveled at her ability to blend instinct with observation. As they moved, Talon whispered plans and pointed to hazards: loose ice, uneven ground, and obstacles that could slow pursuers. Nira followed each gesture perfectly, adapting her movements to match his instructions. They reached a small ridge overlooking the cabin, where they could observe without being seen. The scavengers had entered the cabin, searching methodically but unaware that their targets were already gone. Talon motioned to Nira. "They will come for us eventually. We must be ready to defend ourselves if needed." Nira hummed and nodded. She had begun to understand human strategy, recognizing that brains could often overcome brute force. She also realized that Talon's ingenuity was not just in setting traps, but in anticipating the movements and intentions of others. The night was long. Talon and Nira watched as the scavengers searched, their movements clumsy in the icy terrain. Talon whispered instructions, guiding Nira to observe patterns and predict next moves. She mimicked him, learning the subtle art of strategy. Her eyes shone with concentration, and Talon felt pride at how quickly she adapted to human methods of thinking. Hours passed, and the scavengers finally retreated, frustrated by the clever positioning of Talon's traps and the confusing layout of the terrain. Talon and Nira waited until the intruders were gone before returning to the cabin. Inside, they checked for any damage. The fire had burned low, but the cabin remained intact, a small sanctuary in the frozen world. Talon looked at Nira, her violet eyes wide with a mixture of fear, relief, and excitement. "You did well," he said softly. "You stayed calm, followed instructions, and learned quickly. That saved us both." Nira hummed softly, a sound that seemed almost like pride. She had faced danger, understood human strategy, and realized that her trust in Talon had been wise. The connection between them had strengthened, forged in the quiet intensity of survival. Talon moved to the fireplace and stoked the embers. "We survived tonight, but the world outside is still dangerous. We must always be ready." Nira moved closer to the fire, her body relaxing for. The morning sun rose slowly over the frozen plains of Virelia, painting the snow with a soft golden glow. The world outside remained harsh and unforgiving, but inside Talon's cabin warmth and life had taken hold. Nira was awake early, sitting near the fireplace, her violet eyes reflecting the flickering flames. She had grown stronger each day, her movements more confident, her curiosity growing with every passing moment. Talon sat across from her, sipping a warm drink and observing her quietly. The past days had been filled with learning, communication, and survival. He marveled at her intelligence, her grace, and the way she adapted to his world. She had begun to trust him fully, her initial fear replaced by quiet confidence, and in turn Talon had come to admire her resilience, her courage, and the subtle wisdom in her gestures and hums. "Today feels different," Talon said softly, breaking the silence. "You're stronger now. You could leave soon if you wanted." Nira looked at him, her eyes thoughtful. She had been silent for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. The crash, the storm, and the warmth of the cabin had changed her life in ways she had not expected. She hummed, a long, low sound that carried meaning. Talon interpreted it as contemplation, a sign that she was considering what he had said. "I know leaving may be difficult," Talon continued gently, "but wherever you go, You will carry the strength you've found here, and you will always have a friend." Nira reached out and touched his hand, a gesture of deep trust and gratitude. Her fingers lingered for a moment before retreating, and Talon squeezed her hand gently. The connection between them was no longer fragile. It had grown into something enduring, built on shared experiences, survival, and care. Over the next few hours, Talon and Nira prepared for her departure. They packed a small set of supplies, including warm clothing, nutrient packs, and a few tools she might need on her journey. Talon also added a small device no larger than his palm, which he explained could allow them to communicate over long distances. "This device will let us stay in touch," he said. "Even if you are far away, we can send messages." "It is simple, but it works." Nira examined the device carefully, her fingers tracing the smooth surface. She hummed softly, then nodded, indicating understanding. She had learned quickly over the past days, absorbing not only language and gestures but also human ingenuity. She understood that Talon's gift was more than technology. It was trust, care, and friendship. Before leaving, she walked to the window and looked out over the frozen plains. The world outside was still dangerous, but it was also beautiful. Jagged mountains rose in the distance, and the snow sparkled in the morning light. She hummed, a tone filled with appreciation and quiet resolve. Talon watched her, realizing that she had accepted her journey ahead and that she would carry the lessons of trust and survival with her. "Are you ready?" Talon asked softly, standing beside her. Nira turned to him, her eyes meeting his. She nodded slowly, her hum a gentle affirmation. Talon felt a mix of pride and sadness. Pride because she had grown strong and confident, and sadness because their time together in this small cabin was coming to an end. They stepped outside together, the cold wind brushing against their faces. Nira's body shivered at first, but she quickly adjusted, her alien physiology adapting to the environment. Talon stayed close, walking beside her to ensure her safety. She paused for a moment, looking back at the cabin. The small building had been a sanctuary, a place of warmth, learning, and trust. It had been a home for her, even if only briefly. "You will be safe," Talon said. "Use everything you've learned here. Trust yourself and trust others when you can." Nira hummed in response, then extended her hand. Talon took it, feeling the strength she had gained. Their grip was firm, a silent promise that their bond would endure. At the edge of the clearing, her ship waited, partially repaired but ready for flight. The sleek alien design shimmered in the sunlight, a reminder of the advanced civilization she came from. Talon watched as she approached the ship, her movements confident and purposeful. She turned once to look back at him, her violet eyes meeting his. She hummed softly, a sound filled with gratitude, respect, and connection. Talon raised his hand in farewell. "Fly safely, Nira," he said. "And remember, you are stronger than you know." She nodded, then stepped into the ship. The door closed, and Talon waited as the engines powered up. A soft hum resonated through the cabin as the ship lifted into the sky, ascending above the frozen plains. He watched until it became a small speck against the horizon, feeling a mixture of pride, relief, and longing. The days that followed were quiet. Talon returned to his routines, maintaining the cabin and observing the frozen world outside. Yet the memory of Nira lingered, a reminder of the bond they had formed. He thought often of her resilience, her curiosity, and the way she had embraced trust and friendship. Weeks later, a small signal beeped from the device he had given her. Talon picked it up, and a simple message appeared, written in the symbols and gestures they had developed together. Nira had used the device to communicate, sharing observations about her journey, her people, and the challenges she faced. Talon smiled, realizing that their connection had not been broken by distance. It had grown stronger, reinforced by shared experiences and mutual respect. Over time, Nira's messages became more frequent. She shared discoveries about her home world, insights about human behavior, and small stories of her travels. Talon responded with advice, encouragement, and updates about the frozen world she had left behind. Each exchange reinforced their bond, a bridge between species built on trust, care, and understanding. One evening, as the twin suns set over Viewerlia, Talon reflected on the journey that had begun with a single act of compassion. He had found an alien life form on the brink of death and had chosen to help despite the risks. In doing so, he had not only saved a life but had also demonstrated the strength of human resilience, empathy, and ingenuity. He realized that humans had a unique ability to connect, to inspire trust and to build bonds that transcended language, culture, and even species. That ability had been his greatest tool, and it had changed both his life and Nira's forever. Months later, a faint hum resonated from the device on his desk. Talon picked it up and smiled. Nira's message was brief but filled with warmth, a simple gesture indicating her safe arrival home and her continued friendship. Talon hummed softly in reply, a sound of connection and shared history. In the vast universe, where dangers were many and life was fragile, two beings from different worlds had discovered something extraordinary: the power of trust, the strength of empathy, and the enduring bond of friendship. Nira had returned to her people, carrying the lessons of human resilience and compassion, and Talon had gained a friend who had expanded his understanding of life beyond his world. As the stars emerged above Viralia, Talon looked out over the frozen plains, feeling a sense of fulfillment. He had faced the harshness of the universe and had made a difference. A life had been saved, trust had been earned, and a bridge between worlds had been built. And in that quiet, firelit cabin, a human and an alien had learned the most important lesson of all: that compassion, courage, and understanding could transcend any distance, survive any challenge, and endure across the vastness of space. Talon smiled, knowing that somewhere among the stars, Nira was safe, learning and remembering, and he was ready for whatever the universe would bring next, strengthened by the bond they had formed and the proof that humanity could shine even in the coldest, most distant corners of the galaxy. The fire in his cabin burned steadily, a symbol of warmth, trust, and the enduring power of connection. And as the night deepened, Talon felt a quiet certainty. The universe was vast, life was fragile, but the strength of the human spirit could make all the difference.